I just don't think we're going to be putting thousands and thousands of troops into a war arena without the Americans. I mean, the long-term solution to this, if Ukraine can hang on,
Yes.
is that we do train them even more, give them even more weapons,
Yes.
and get our own weapons, which are up to the standards of the United States, notably long-range fires. Certainly ballistic missile defense, which we're years behind the Americans on, and heavy lift capability in transporting people around. So unless we get the Americans to guarantee that they'll help us with that, then we're left with empty.
The so-called coalition of the willing of European leaders have been speaking today. Along with Canada, they've been discussing next steps after yesterday's meeting of Presidents Trump and Zelensky at the White House, and that a meeting involving so many prime ministers and presidents from Europe. And of course, they've got a lot to talk about. They have been talking at a meeting of a video conference of the coalition of the willing earlier in the day. And have you heard anything to convince you that there is any good reason to celebrate the last few days of frantic diplomacy, unless that is you happen to be Vladimir Putin and his gang in the Kremlin? And when you look at the Russian media and the pro-Kremlin mouthpieces in Russia, they really are celebrating. So why? Well, the threat of severe US sanctions has gone. And so, as far as the White House is concerned, is the demand for a ceasefire. And while Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron of France and Merz of Germany and the rest were busy talking again today about somehow providing a joint force to guard the peace in Ukraine as and when it comes, Putin has been given a green light to keep attacking Ukraine. And when that peace finally does come, what is to deter Putin from picking up his attack on Ukraine where he left off? I wonder, tell me, what am I missing? If I'm being too negative, too downbeat, do please tell me. Send me a text, 87222, start with the word Times, or a tweet to @TimesRadio. Now, in the last few minutes, we've had reports coming in from Axios, the news service, that the American Secretary of State Marco Rubio says he'll lead talks on those security guarantees as and when peace comes along. And we do know, of course, that Trump is promising air support to that security force, though no American troops. Where are we left? Well, we can talk first to Tim Marshall, who's a former foreign correspondent and a highly regarded author on this subject, on the book Prisoners of Geography, which I thoroughly recommend. Hello, Tim.
Thank you, John. I would love to disagree with you, but on this occasion, I'm struggling to.
I find it's difficult to disagree with that analysis. I mean, as of where we are at the moment, is there any way to see this as anything but advances for Putin, one after the other, and at best a standstill, and maybe more likely steps back for Ukraine and those supporting it?
Only if most of us are wrong. I'm not always signed up to conventional thinking, but on this one, and I've been thinking it through and trying to get round issues, and I can't. But to answer your question, okay, how could we be positive? Trump has jumped the tracks, by which I mean the diplomatic tracks. He's gone off on his own. He's done it in a different way. There is more now on the table than the Europeans have ever managed to put up in 2 years. And so if you can use this window to get the Americans, and this is where it starts to immediately get iffy, to actually sign up to a security guarantee that means something,
yes.
At which point the Europeans will think, oh great, then we are on track. I was thinking of an analogy this afternoon, actually, John, when you were kind enough to invite me on, and I came up with a tablecloth. Think of a peace deal as a tablecloth, the peace treaty. Normally, the diplomatic track spends literally months. One side says, oh, hang on a minute, there's a tear there. Okay, you stitch up the tear. The other side says, I don't like the stain on that table. Okay, we'll clean that stain. Is it okay? Is it clean enough for you? Then both sides say, hang on, there's these wrinkles. Get the iron out, wrinkle them all out. On the very last day, one side pulls a fast one and says, hang on, there's a crease there you've missed. Could derail it. No. And finally, you put it on the table and you sign it. Well, Trump's on about a trilateral in 2 weeks' time, 3 weeks' time. It just hasn't gone through my tablecloth analogy. If he can bust through all that, game on.
Yeah, there's so many ifs there. I mean, the ifs that
Yeah,
lead you to mile high brick walls of obstacle.
yeah.
Your analysis, Tim, seems to me to be just unimpeachably strong. I mean, do stay there if you can. I want to bring in Ben Hodges now, who's also on the line. He's the former commanding general of the U.S. Army in Europe, and he's always welcome with us. Hello to you, General.
Hey, John, and I'm happy to say I have Tim's book here with me, and this is my summer reading that I'll finish up this week.
Checks
Strongly.
in the post,
The
General.
checks
Thank
in
you.
the post. You've done your bit there. Now, look, I mean, do add your thoughts to what we've heard from Tim there. I mean, shall we talk then about this security guarantee, so-called, for Ukraine? Apparently, we learned just in the last few minutes that the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is ready to host talks on that force of security to, if and when we get a peace in Ukraine, to guard the peace. But General, without an American presence on the ground, how useful could that force really be in deterring Russia from another attack?
Well, I have to say I'm very skeptical that this is even going to happen,
Yes.
unfortunately, um, mainly because of my president, the American president, has a well-developed record of backing down, not doing anything that threatens Putin in any meaningful way. And
Mm.
I fully understand it. I know there's a lot of speculation, but that's where we are. I was impressed yesterday with the solidarity of the European leaders there at the White House. They were there, I think, in part to protect President Zelensky, but also, as President Macron said, this is not just about Ukrainian security, it's about European security. And so there's a level of solidarity there that I had not seen before. It still remains to be seen, will European countries, especially if the United States is not a key part of it, will European countries step forward to protect themselves, because that's what we're talking about. Now, when we talk about some kind of a security guarantee, it starts taking on the shape of a force, like there would be a force that would be there. And if I'm CDS, my first question is, okay, great, we've got thousands of great British soldiers and Marines and airmen. What is our job? What are we supposed to do? What is the mission? And this is where the U.S. administration, including under President Biden, has failed to clearly identify the strategic outcome. You have to do that before you can talk about Tim's tablecloth. That's the first part of the tablecloth, is what are we trying to accomplish?
Yeah, Tim?
Yeah, and the general is a fighting man, and he knows. Here's some creases in this tablecloth. I don't want to push the analogy too far. The general probably knows that the bits of the Donbass that Putin says he wants includes the most fortified defensive line on the front lines. Now, if the Ukrainians were to give that up, having been told, don't worry, the cavalry will ride to the rescue, it means that in 2 years, 5 years, however long it's going to take Putin to come back for another bite, they are then defending from a much, much, much weaker position. So you're going to have it in copper-bottomed writing, this defense force. Now, I'm not convinced the British can pony up, let's say, 10,000 troops, because
Yes.
that means 30,000, because you have to train, be on mission, and then rest, and then you're rotating around. I don't think Europe can put up 50,000 troops, and you've got a 600-mile long ceasefire
Yes.
line. So what's in it for the Ukrainians to give up territory unless the Americans are going to come in and say, we guarantee you, Europeans, if the Russians break this, because we're going to force Zelensky to sign, but don't worry, nothing else will happen, because we will put in the air power. We will have 100 fighter jets in Romania and Poland. You will have 100,000 troops on the front lines. Because if you haven't got that in writing, then I think all the Americans would really be doing is using their heavy lift capability, because we don't have any,
Yes.
to get us out of the way
Yes.
if it happens again.
Yeah, I mean, and so far then, the idea of a security force, multinational security force, to guarantee the peace looks like a paper exercise. I mean, you've got Putin saying he won't live with it, which sounds like a deterrent in itself. And even if there was a mind among those European leaders to go ahead and put together a force and even deploy it, they haven't got the strength, they haven't got the numbers to form a credible deterrent. I mean, General, where then do you go from here? I mean, it was suggested by a Ukrainian, a senior politician to me just a short while ago this afternoon, that maybe the United Nations could step in, and by a former American politician that maybe some other multinational force could do the job. Does any of that seem likely and credible, Ben?
No, not credible at all. Think about how successful the NATO I-4, the implementation force, was in 1995, 96, when it went into Bosnia. And to Tim's point, it was over a year of very hard negotiations between Bosnia, Serbia, and Croatia, with Ambassador Holbrooke and others working very hard to hammer out the Dayton Peace Accord. And then you had a force, a multinational NATO-led force with very robust rules of engagement that would allow use of deadly force. If any Serbian even aimed his weapon at a NATO soldier, it had a clear mission and a clear chain of command. That's what you have to have if there's going to be any kind of force in Ukraine. But I would say a big difference here and an advantage is that this force would or should be integrated with the hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian troops that are already there. So they're not going to be out there by themselves. They would be integrated into the Ukrainian forces. Now, of course, the Russians will go crazy on that and they will complain about it, but that's something that they would respect.
Yes.
And so now that's a heavy lift for our political leaders to explain what we're doing there. But at the end of the day, that's what's got to happen. You have to explain what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I'm just going to, as it were, just like vault over the small matter of Vladimir Putin saying he's not going to countenance NATO troops in the territory of Ukraine. And just, Tim, put through to you this idea that's come from Giorgia Meloni, the Italian leader, which was about the backup troops, the international backup troops, not being up there on the front line, what would have been the front line, the line of contact, being in the background away from any sort of potential theatre of war involved in training and so on, but having something like a guarantee of mutual defence on the lines of NATO's Article 5 as part of that treaty. So attack one, you attack all of us. Trouble is, Tim, that Ukraine has seen deals being signed and deals being torn up before. When they gave up their nuclear weapons, there was a guarantee of Western support, which wasn't there when it was needed.
Budapest Memorandum, 94. It was so loose, the language, which is why they will insist on having the language nailed down on this one. And we are going around in circles, and I don't say that as an insult. It's just that this is what will be happening in negotiations. Because Meloni, it's not a bad idea. We need lots of ideas which can be kicked around and changed until you come up with something that's acceptable. And we can say to the Russians, you don't get to tell us where our troops go. Unless it's in your country, then you have a say. So you can take that hard view and then say, but as a SOP, we'll only be training. But again, I just don't think we're going to be putting thousands and thousands of troops into a war arena without the Americans. I mean, the long-term solution to this, if Ukraine can hang on, is that we do train them even more, give them even more weapons, and get our own weapons, which are up to the standards of the United States, notably long-range fires, certainly ballistic missile defense, which we're years behind the Americans on, and heavy lift capability in transporting people around. So unless we get the Americans to guarantee that they'll help us with that, then we're left with empty promises, I think. We've got to come up with a solution where the Russians will give some way. For example, I think freezing the front lines where they are is a possibility. If you then come back with, in that case, we'll only put trainers in. And the Russians can say, all right, we'll freeze these lines, but you must recognize that Crimea is Russia. Maybe that's something that can be given. But the positions where they are now are not going to be agreed.
Yeah. I mean, look, Ben, last word with you. It does seem there is no pathway to peace, as it's now being called, again and again, without America stepping in significantly. Perfectly right from the point of view of principle, and from America's point of view, to see the European leaders, stepping up much more firmly than they've done so far in terms of resource, in terms of material, equipment, manpower, all of that, much more needed from the European leaders. But in the end, America has to be there in terms of firm commitment to some sort of peace guarantee force, or if it's required, and you could say it certainly is, pressure on Russia by way of tough sanctions, which is within America's power. Now, you know Washington better than most of us. Is there hope of that happening?
Well, it's funny that most of the Congress supports these secondary sanctions that would hammer China and India and Turkey and other countries that are the main countries buying Russian oil and gas, which is the only thing that keeps Russia in this war. So there is support in the Congress to do this. The problem is the president. Seems to be unwilling to use the enormous advantages that he has over the Russians. If he would say it is our strategic interest that Ukraine is successful in defending its sovereignty, that Russia is forced to live with it on its own borders because of what it means for our interest in Europe, our biggest trading partner, and also as a deterrent message to China, then we could start doing the things that need to be done. Wreck Russia's oil and gas infrastructure, use the frozen assets that are in European and American banks,
Yes,
and use to help Ukraine. We haven't even used the economic tools that we have. And at least as a minimum, we ought to do for Ukraine what we do for Israel and what we do for shipping out in the Red Sea, which is knock down Russian missiles and drones. You could even do it from inside bases inside Poland, for example, or let's go into Western Ukraine. But we ought to be able to help do that, which we do for Israel and the shipping in the Red Sea.
All right. U.S. Army General Ben Hodges and author Tim Marshall, author of Prisoners of Geography, which I recommend very strongly. Thanks both. Always good to talk to both of you.